There's Geordie. Hey, Geordie. Nice to see you. Yeah, so the last time Geordie was here in 2014, he was the only guy in the games completely making quantum computers. I didn't understand what quantum computers were, and I'm not sure I understand it now, but he was getting 10 million bucks a machine and selling them to some of the most important organizations in the world, like NASA, like the CIA, like Mr. Bezos. And so you gave a talk, and I looked at the talk in preparation for this thing, and I still don't quite understand what a quantum computer is. But in any case, you're not doing that anymore.
That's true.
And now you're interested in building humanoid robots that are almost identical to humans. Do I get that correctly?
That's part of it.
That's part of it. And will they be able to understand what a quantum computer is?
It's part of what I'm going to be talking about.
All right. Well, then why don't you get started?
All right. Thank you, Moses. Thanks, everybody. So, this is a really tough topic. Last time I was here 6 years ago, I framed what I wanted to say by giving a bunch of predictions about the future. I'm not going to do that this time. What I'm going to do is, instead of predict the future, what I'm going to try to do is explain a viewpoint. And the viewpoint is shared by a lot of people who are working in call it the frontiers of AI nowadays. But to get to AI and the frontier of how we think about minds, I want to roll way back. So we have a long evolutionary history tracing back, depending on how you count it, a few 100,000 years, entities that are substantially like us. You can imagine, and I would encourage you to imagine, that you are a proto-human on the savanna of what's now Africa. And you're sitting together with your tribe, which could be the people in this room, coming back from a successful hunt. The wind picks up. Clouds boil above you. There's an immense earth-shattering boom. Lightning strikes right near your camp, maybe destroying half of the people in the tribe. Maybe you wake up a few hours later, and I wonder what you're thinking. Nature, the world that surrounds us, is a terrible and wondrous place, filled with chaos and difficult to explain things. We don't really need to go back to the prehistory of our thinking to understand how difficult the world around us is to explain. So the other day I was walking back from work and I saw a monarch. That's not a monarch, but I saw a monarch butterfly. And I started thinking about this thing that people say, that monarchs fly thousands of miles in their migratory patterns, from Canada all the way down to Mexico and back. And I was thinking, I have no idea how that works. If you step outside of the myopic lens of everyday life and you look outside at a thing that's green or alive, you have to be humbled by the fact of how difficult it is for the human mind to even conceive of what's going on with these things. The natural world is filled with chaos and fury, terror and wonder. And I feel sometimes like we think we understand everything there is. And I was a theoretical physicist in a past life, and I'm guilty of this, but as I've gotten older, I've disavowed myself of some of those notions. But it's certainly the case that the world around us is very difficult to understand for a variety of reasons. Now, back not so long ago, maybe tracing back to our proto-human ancestors, one of the reasons that you might have ascribed to this bolt of lightning from the heavens is that it was caused by some supernatural agent, like a god. And this idea that the terror and wonder that surrounds us has a cause is a very strong human, it's entwined with who we are as a species. So we like to understand the way things work. If we can't, we want to ascribe those things to something else. So religion, throughout the history of our species, from the beginnings to now, has played an important role in trying to understand things. Call it a theory of everything. Now, science, and Avery's going to be talking about this picture, I think, a little bit later. Science is a different way, maybe complementary, to explain nature. And as a physicist, I was always under the impression that if we really wanted to understand the way things are, what we did is we did a reductionist approach where we took everything there was and asked the question, what causes all of this at the most fundamental level? Is it strings? Is it some as yet to be unified theory of quantum gravity? So I thought that if you wanted the quest to know the truth of the matter, what you needed to do was understand the mathematical properties of the universe, this thing that's so hard to understand. Want to boil down its complexity to something simple that we can get. Now, don't believe that anymore. And what I want to do is share a different perspective on this problem. It's not that the physicist's approach is wrong, and actually I don't think that the religious approach is wrong either. I think there are different ways to frame the same problem. The way that I'd like to frame this here and the substance of what I want to talk to you about is that regardless of how you feel about it, there is a literal, incontrovertible fact that every thought that a human has ever thought resides inside our mind. The world around you may or may not be real. What is real for sure is the stuff that's inside your head. Your thoughts do not persist outside of your skull. They're inside. They exist inside your mind. And because of that, I've begun over the period of about a decade to devote myself to the problem of understanding how minds work. What is a mind? Does everything have a mind? Or is it only humans? If humans have them, what do they do and how do they work? So I view the theory of understanding minds as being the literally most important thing that we can do, because every human endeavor resides within it. Every talk you'll hear at this conference is about thoughts in a person or people's minds. All of them. There is no exception. Thinking about curing cancer, thinking about going to Mars, thinking about the people around you, thinking about yourself. It all happens in this tiny little thing inside your head. We don't know how it works. That is a tragedy that we need to fix. So I am doing my best in my own way to try to get at this. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is get to the meat of this. I'm going to try to explain one of the perspectives for how minds work, which has become, I'd say, ascendant in the study of minds. So the people who work on the leading edges of AI, if you read a story about an AI doing something special, this is the way that most people think about this. So it may be wrong, and parts of it probably are, but I want to remove some of the fear you may have by removing some of the unknown. You know, H.P. Lovecraft, famous turn-of-the-century American horror writer, said something, I'm paraphrasing, that fear is the strongest human emotion and fear of the unknown is the strongest of those. So I think part of the reason why we're afraid of AI in the future is that we don't understand it. So what I'm going to try to do is give you a little bit of an understanding. Now, this quote is really important to understand the way that scientists feel about AI, because it contains two different things, both of which are very poorly defined, but I'm going to try to do that. One is intelligence and one are goals. So the way that this framework works is that an entity has goals, which come from somewhere, we'll talk about that, and they have intelligence, which is the means to achieve the goal. So imagine you and a toaster both for some reason have the goal of toasting toast. It's better at that than you are. So in this way of thinking about it, you're led to some very peculiar conclusions about what it means to be intelligent. And by the way, that toaster thing is not a little like semantic joke. It goes to the heart of the problem of doing this, is that our definitions for these things are terrible. We have to sort of strip back some of the entitlement that we have about what makes us special. We are special, there's no question about that. But when we're thinking about these things from first principles, we have to strip that away and earn it. If we want to be special in some way, we should show that's why we're special, not just assume that we are. Okay, so on this picture, there's a thermometer. A thermometer has what you might think of as a goal. Its goal is the mercury should be at the right temperature. Now, we don't usually ascribe words like goals to thermometers, and part of the reason for this is that we understand a thermometer through its mechanism. We think, okay, we understand the physics of mercury, and that creates the behavior. But one of the main takeaways of this part of the explanation is that mechanistic ways of looking at things, it's just a machine. And the usual way we describe intelligent things, it has goals and dreams and purpose and all that. They're different ways of looking at the same thing in this framework, okay? Remember, I said this might be wrong, but this is the way this framework works. What's shown here is a system called AlphaGo, which DeepMind, Google sub, built, and it had a goal to win at Go. It's an old game, move stones around. The game-playing AI, AlphaGo, was very good at this. Its quote-unquote intelligence, its ability to deliver on the goal, was better than any human player. And this first system, AlphaGo, has been superseded by several different ones that are much, much, much better, consume less resources when training and all that. So why is it that we might think more naturally of AlphaGo as having a goal of winning a game than a thermometer of predicting temperature? I think the reason is very simple. It's harder for us to understand the mechanisms of AlphaGo. So if you're an AI researcher and you've read all the papers and maybe duplicated the result yourself, you understand every single piece of how that thing works. It's a mechanism, just like a thermometer. But if you're not, it's better to think of this thing as having a goal. Now, we can project this forward now, this idea that systems can both be mechanisms, they obey the rules of physics, just like a thermometer does, and they can have goals, and we can look at this in two different ways. So for humans, when we think of goals, we usually think of exceptionally complicated things. So this is Andrew Yang running for the leadership of the Democratic Party in the United States. He has a goal. He wants to be the president of the United States. Now, it's natural for us to think about Andrew Yang in terms of a goal-seeking intelligence, and not like a thermometer with all the atoms and whatnot. But what I'm going to try to get you to think about is this frame shift, where maybe those two things are not different. And then a machine with an understood algorithm, the way it works, and a goal-seeking intelligence like a living creature are just two different ways of looking at the same thing. Okay, so I know that, right. So the bind that you're always in when you do this sort of thing, and I've done this a lot, like basically for the last 20 years, all I've done is try to explain things. And I think you guys are really bright. And I think often when people are doing this sort of thing, they say, oh, whatever, I'm just going to show some pictures. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try my best to explain at some high level of abstraction the picture of the mind that is the leading one today, okay? So what I'm going to start is by looking at that word up top, embodiment. Embodiment has this box around it. You can roughly think of an embodiment as a body. So I am constituted of stuff. It sort of ends where my skin ends, more or less. Most living creatures are like this, maybe all. And a lot of machines are like this too, but not all. They have this outline. So inside this outline are a bunch of, think of them as sensors or filters. We think of them as your five senses, touch, sight, so on. You are bombarded by an enormous amount of information coming from this wonderful and terrible thing that we are born into all the time. Most of it, you don't register. Even in the visible spectrum, the things that you can see with your eyes, most of the information in this room doesn't register inside your brain. So what we do as a thing is we take all of this stuff and we convert it into a tiny little thing, which is what the people in this field call observations. Observations are what make it through into you from the outside world. And this includes everything from, like, you know, how your stomach is feeling to, you know, a whole thing. Every single thing that comes into your brain, let's call it, or your mind more abstractly, is coming through this filter that's your body. There's a special type of thing in this world called reward. And you can think of reward as the instantaneous goodness of what just happened. So if I touch a stove and it's hot, man, that's negative reward. My observations coming in my fingers are like, don't do that. That's terrible. Reward is this instantaneous thing that happens in the moment as you move through the world. Now, in the middle is perhaps the most important part of this, which this field calls an agent. An agent contains two parts. The first part on the left is, you can think of it as setting the sequence of state. So first of all, let me back up. This entity, you, can't know everything about the world, which is that environment. So the environment contains everything. Where all the black holes are, whether Hawking radiation is here or whatever, like everything, okay? That is absolutely incalculable. It's just a concept. We can't actually have access to it. Your inside your brain is trying to make a model of that in the degrees of freedom that matter to you. So you don't care about like where the nearest black hole is, probably, unless you're an astrophysicist. That's not important information to you. Most things aren't. So the state representation you can think of as how your all you know and all you feel about where you are now. And a goal is a desire to change that. So as a simple example, my sensorium is telling me I don't have anything in my hand right now. If my goal is to have a water bottle in my hand, I do some things, and voila, I've now achieved my goal state. So the thing on the left, the state representation update, you can think of as a sequence of goals. The thing on the right, the policy, tells you what to do given that you want to make a change. So this is where intelligence resides. Because that box on the right tells you, what do I do to get what I want? It doesn't tell you what you want. That's the box on the left. So this way of dividing these agents explicitly separates goals from capability to have goals or get goals, which we'll call intelligence. And then once your policy has decided how to move, your body changes. This is really important, is that the fundamental picture here is you get this very small amount of information about the world. You've got a bunch of stuff in your head that makes you think about where you're at and where you want to be. Then you act. And when you act, you change the universe in a small way. And then that feeds back, and this whole thing loops forever. So that was my best explanation in 3 minutes of what you'd need to do like a full graduate degree on. So this is called reinforcement learning, this picture. But it's a little bit more general than that. It's also called embodied cognition. It's the way people think about this largely. Okay. Now this picture, in this view of the world, applies to all living things. So bacteria don't have neurons and they don't have brains, but they're still the same kind of thing. They get chemical gradients coming in through their sensorium. They move by wiggling their flagella, and they get reward by consuming things like sugar. So a bacteria moves through the world, doing its bacterium thing. 15% of the world's biomass is bacteria. They're doing pretty well. Einstein is the same. Einstein receives information through his sensory organs, goes about his thing, moves. One of those movements is writing, typing, or talking. And these things become, the legacy of who Einstein is. Important is that this picture doesn't need the body to be a bunch of meat. The body can be a robot. In the body, you can have sensors like cameras and microphones and so on. And the movements of robots are, what you'd expect. So an example is a car, a self-driving car. A self-driving car has a bunch of sensors. It can move. It does it itself. It gets reward. It has goals. The picture on the top left is one of the sanctuary synths. They're the humanoid systems that we build. The one on the top right is a Kindred robot, which is our previous company that we built that does the same thing in a very isolated, specific environment. Okay, so I'm going to conclude by leaving you with some thoughts. So this picture has got a big gaping hole in it. It's absent one really important thing, is that why should you do anything at all? Why move at all? Why have goals? Where do they come from? Well, the evolutionary picture has a very simple answer, is that certain types of activities in our ancestry were successful and were bred into us, and some weren't. So the goals that we have come from that evolutionary ancestry. But we also know now that that ancestry, the inbred goals that we have, is dangerous, because some of our inbred tendencies include things like xenophobia, which are really easily hijacked if you have a political agenda. In the future, when we can design minds, an important thing to understand is that designed minds can have any goals we want. In this wonderful story by Greg Eden called Permutation City, which I highly recommend that you read, the post-humans, some of them, explicitly go through this. Their goals can be set by themselves or some other systems. And one of the protagonists, his goal was just to carve table legs. That's all he wanted. He was really intelligent, but all he wanted was to carve table legs. And I think this little koan, Zen koan, is really kind of a key of this, is that what the goal of a machine is is what we decide it is. We didn't get the choice, but we can gift this choice to our machine friends. And I'll just conclude by showing you a picture which a good friend and one of the true pioneers of AI, and also a Canadian, Rich Sutton, originally shared. And it's an idea of circles of empathy. The key question that we have to answer about the future of AI has nothing to do with the thing that I'm calling intelligence, and everything to do with the goals. We need to figure out who gets to decide what the super intelligent minds of the future want. So my perspective on this is the zeroth order commandment is we have to design machines that have goals that are good for us in some sense, and the hard question is who gets to decide what those are. You are surrounded already by alien minds. The bots that Russia used together with humans to influence the US election had a goal. They had an embodiment, all those typing fingers, and they had what I would consider to be super intelligent capabilities of some sort or another, either because there are a lot of people involved or whatnot. If you turn your mind to think about minds of technological artifacts, they're already here. This isn't science fiction. They're among us. And we're not prepared to have the discussion about what they should be designed for. And this is really, really critical, because if we choose goals for our machines that are contrary to our goals, we're going to be in competition with them, and we're not going to win. The future, I think, is going to be wonderful and terrific, but our place in it isn't guaranteed. If we make bad decisions, the future could turn over to our machine children and not our biological children. That's why I think that this idea of understanding how these things work is so important for people to understand, and I think that it's tragically misunderstood how critically important it is to get this right. Thank you.
In your lab, you actually create the synth? You build the synth?
Yes, we have several. The intent is to create systems that are indistinguishable from human.
Right. And so your goal is to mimic the human in form and in function.
Think of it as deriving the angels of our better nature somehow, and distilling it into an AI whose goals are aligned with the things that we would generally think are good, and not things that we would agree are bad. So what we're trying to do is, the machines, the reason I didn't show any videos of cool robots moving is it's totally beside the point, really. The point of this is that we have to decide what the minds want. And part of our thesis is that minds that are engaged in social activity, naturally, we will like them more, they will do better if they like the things that we like and they want the things that we want. We can create machines that are wanting to cure cancer, for example. We can create machines that want to cure death, for that matter. You know, you can do anything you like as a goal system. But thinking about this explicitly in terms of what do humans want is, I think, the right way to look at the problem. And part of the lens we look at that through is people respond differently to machines that look like people than they do to machines that don't.
So Sanctuary is an academic exercise, a research exercise?
No, it's a business. It's like D-Wave, a for-profit corporation driven by a vision. The D-Wave vision was a world with quantum computers. The Sanctuary vision is a world with good AI, minds like ours that want the same things that we want.
But what will you sell? Will you sell the synth?
Example, if you can crack this basic problem of being able to make machines that are like people in some essential way, you can task them to any task you like. And it's my thesis that these types of things will be better at very valuable things than we are. So you can put them against problems that have great commercial value. One of the obvious ones in the beginning is companionship. So the part of the mental health problems that we have created for ourselves come from a dislocation of people. People don't deal with people anymore. They're proxied through this weird, bizarre universe that comes through our screen. There's a possibility, it might sound outlandish, I know, that you can reverse that effect by creating technological things that are more like people. So instead of staring at a screen, maybe you stare at something that looks like you, and maybe that will help somehow. Now, I don't know. Again, a lot of this is experimental, but the root value in this is the mind. Is if you can crack the problem of how to create minds that are human-like or animal-like, you can task them to do anything you like, and that includes the entire world's economic activity.
Merely that. Okay. Thank you, George. Let's take a picture. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much.
Still in Vancouver, by the way?
Yes, in Vancouver. Vancouver is a beautiful place that most of the team has put down roots in, and yeah, we're going to try to do this from Vancouver.
Okay. Can I visit on my next trip?
Oh, absolutely. We'd love to have you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
This way.